Hey guys, tonight, a plain wash basin is going to reveal 15 brutal hygiene truths that Little House on the Prairie never made its continuing story. The series sometimes showed a basin, a bath, or a clean apron. Rarely did it show those details accumulating into daily household work. Even the clean apron had an unseen backstage crew. Water still had to be found, carried, sometimes warmed, used, and carried away. Before the first pail is lifted, get comfortable and like and subscribe only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. And if you'd ever like to bring a little piece of this world home, our 3 little books live at prairiesecrets.com. Just scan the QR code on your screen, or if you're listening on your phone, you'll find the links waiting in the description and the pinned comments below. No hurry at all. Whether you're wide awake or sinking into the pillow, there is a room beside the fire. Dim the lights, let your shoulders settle, and if you drift off in the middle, good, that is the point. I will keep watch. The path tonight moves from the water in one small basin, through soap, clothing, wash day, private care, waste, food, sickness, earth walls, frozen weather, and finally the town shelves where new goods and new knowledge arrived unevenly. Prairie families were not simply indifferent to dirt. Cleanliness mattered. The unseen cost was how much labour, material, privacy, judgment and care it demanded. The hidden work begins in the shallow curve of the basin itself. A representative household basin from the late 19th century could be made of painted tin, iron coated with enamel, earthenware, or another material suited to the family purse and the nearest market. It might sit with a pitcher on a washstand. In a smaller or less settled room, it might rest wherever a level surface could be found. This is not an authenticated Ingalls possession. It is the sort of ordinary vessel that helps recover an ordinary practice. Modern eyes can mistake washing at a basin for a poor substitute for a shower or tub. That judgment begins with the wrong standard. A cloth, a modest amount of water, and practiced hands could clean the face, neck, ears, hands, arms, and other parts of the body without filling a bath. Historical household advice treated local washing as genuine care. The goal was not always immersion. The goal might be to remove sweat and soil, freshen the skin, prepare for school or work, or restore order before bed. That changed the arithmetic of water. A full vessel large enough for a body demanded many trips, plenty of fuel, and somewhere private enough to use it. A basin demanded less. Less did not mean none. The water still had to come from a well, pump, spring, creek, cistern, or stored supply, depending on place and time. Someone still lifted it. Someone still protected it from dust and careless waste. If warmth was wanted, a portion had to meet the stove or hearth. The cloth mattered too. A square of linen or cotton could carry water to the skin, loosen dirt, and reach places that could not comfortably be leaned over a bowl. It then became another item to rinse, dry, and keep serviceable. In a crowded household, each use raised practical questions about which cloth was clean, which water remained fit for another purpose, and where damp things could be hung. Advice books could recommend order. They could not make the room larger. Clean water at the start did not remain clean. Soap, skin, soot, and dust entered the basin. The used water then had to go somewhere. With no drain waiting beneath the bowl, a finished wash created a second trip. The vessel might be carried outdoors or empty into an approved waste place. That quiet return trip is part of hygiene too. The clean face was visible. The disposal rarely was. For women and girls, the basin also belonged to the working rhythm of the house. Caroline Ingalls and her daughters lived in households where domestic order was made by repeated acts, although the surviving record does not give a complete schedule for every home and every year. A face washed for the day was one act. A cloth rinsed and dried was another. Water fetched and waste removed extended the task beyond the moment at the mirror. Care appeared as a result long after its separate motions disappeared. Men and boys contributed to household resources in documented ways as well. Charles Ingalls built, repaired, cut fuel, travelled, and worked for supplies across the family's changing homes. The exact division of every pail cannot be reconstructed. It would be as misleading to assign all carrying to one person as it would be to pretend the burden floated in by itself. Water entered a household through labour, opportunity, and local circumstance. The basin therefore sat at the meeting point of body, house, and landscape. On one side stood a person who needed washing. On another stood the source, perhaps close, perhaps inconvenient, perhaps seasonally unreliable. Around both stood the household economy of fuel, cloth, time, and strength. A small bowl could be efficient because it concentrated limited resources. That efficiency was a skill, not evidence that cleanliness did not matter. Period advice often joined washing with ventilation, clean clothing, combed hair, and orderly rooms. These recommendations reveal a culture that noticed dirt and valued neatness. They cannot establish that each family followed every printed instruction, or that one national ideal described every prairie home. Advice literature usually tells historians what writers wanted readers to do. It must be placed beside objects, memoirs, archaeology, local conditions, and the inconvenient silences of everyday life. Those silences are especially important with the Ingalls family. Laura Ingalls. Wilder's books preserve selected scenes shaped into literature. Her earlier autobiographical record preserves other details. Neither was written as a daily hygiene log. The television series made another transformation, turning family history and fiction into episodic drama. A basin may appear in any one of those worlds without explaining the full chain that brought water to its rim. The basin's deeper truth is therefore quiet. People did not need to climb into a tub for washing to count. They cleaned themselves in portions because the method matched the tools and costs around them. The hardship lay not in a complete absence of care, but in the repeated preparation that care required. Each modest wash borrowed minutes from another task and strength from a finite day. There was judgment in the sequence. Hands soiled by work might need attention before food was handled. A face might be washed before entering public company. Feet could demand care after dust, mud, or long walking. Children needed guidance, reminders, and help. Water warm enough to comfort one person might cool before the next use. None of this produced a dramatic frontier tableau. It produced ordinary order. It also produced intimacy. One person might prepare water for another, who was young, ill, tired, or unable to manage alone. The record seldom captures every such exchange. No private feeling needs to be invented to understand the action. A filled basin placed within reach is already evidence of work directed toward another body. That is why the object gradually becomes more than a prop. At first, it appears to be only a vessel. Look longer, and it records a chain. Water left its source. A hand carried it. Heat may have changed it. Cloth touched it. Dirt entered it. Another hand carried the remainder away. The bowl ended where it began, empty on a table, while the person beside it looked presentable enough for the next part of the day. For a listener returning here after a few wandering minutes, the basin gently gives the way back. It is small, its water is limited, yet it contains the household question that will govern everything ahead. What did cleanliness require before pipes, taps, drains, and effortless heat hid the labour inside the wall? The answer begins with proportion. Washing was adjusted to need, weather, available water, and the demands still waiting. A basin wash could be careful and sufficient for its immediate purpose. It could also leave other needs for another time. That was not necessarily failure. It was domestic triage, practiced without using the modern name. Before the vessel grows larger, the ordinary basin deserves one final measure. Its usefulness depended on placement. A bowl near the sleeping space made morning or evening washing possible without turning the entire house into a bathroom. A pitcher could hold the clean supply apart from the used water below. That separation was simple, but it preserved the difference between what was ready and what had finished its work. The basin's surface also required care. Painted metal could chip, earthenware could crack, enamel could wear. A damaged vessel might remain useful, yet rough places were harder to clean and easier to neglect. Household objects lasted because people guarded, scrubbed, repaired, reassigned, or finally replaced them. A basin was inexpensive beside a pump or stove, but it was not disposable. Time of day gave the small wash different meanings. Morning washing prepared a body for shared space and public view. Washing after labour removed a particular layer of dust or sweat. Evening care protected bedding from some of the day's soil. These are period patterns, not a proven Ingalls timetable. Their value lies in showing why partial washing answered real needs. Because the vessel was handled often, its ordinary condition mattered. A stable rim, a sound bottom, and a surface that could be wiped protected the next use. Damage did not erase usefulness, but it changed how easily the basin could be cleaned and carried. Once the small wash is understood on its own terms, the full bath looks different. It was not the only measure of cleanliness. It was a much larger household project, one that multiplied every demand already visible in the bowl. A full bath began by turning the basin's chain into a longer one. The vessel had to be large enough to permit more than a face and hands. Water had to be gathered in greater quantity. Cold water might need warming, but a large volume could not be heated as simply as a cup or kettle. Privacy had to be created in a house whose rooms served several purposes. When the washing ended, the heavy used water still had to leave. This is why a bath in an unplumbed home was not merely a matter of deciding to be clean. It was a decision about the whole room. Furniture might need moving. A tub or other suitable vessel had to be brought into position if bathing took place indoors. Towels, cloths, soap, clean clothing, and a screen or closed door had to be ready. The stove that heated water was also expected to cook food and warm the house. Historical images and surviving objects show many kinds of bathing arrangements. Portable tubs existed. So did sitz baths, foot baths, washstands, pitchers, and commercial cleansers. Some households had greater access to manufactured equipment than others. Townhomes, farmhouses, rented rooms, forts, and temporary shelters did not share one routine. The strongest conclusion is variety. That matters because frontier folklore loves a fixed Saturday bath. In the familiar version, one tub receives the family in an assigned order, often with the youngest first and an unlucky adult last. No adequate evidence makes it a universal Prairie rule, and no reliable Ingalls record establishes it as their fixed practice. Families may have reused water when scarcity demanded it. They may also have changed it. A possibility is not a schedule. Laura's literary world includes bathing and washing scenes, but a scene in a novel cannot safely be converted into a census of private behaviour. It shows what the author chose to place in that episode and how she shaped it for readers. The television adaptation chose again. A brief bath could serve comedy, illness, childhood, courtship, or plot. What disappeared between scenes was the preparation that had no neat dramatic ending. Season altered every choice. In warm weather, water could be less punishing to handle, and outdoor privacy might sometimes be improvised. Yet outdoor bathing introduced exposure, insects, dust, and the gaze of neighbours or family. In winter, an indoor room offered shelter but demanded fuel and space. Cold air tightened the time available before water cooled. Damp hair and wet floors became problems of their own. The size of the household changed the calculation again. A bath for one person could be fitted around work. Bathing several people meant repeating preparation, managing privacy, and deciding what water remained usable. Small children needed supervision. An older or ill person might need assistance. The absence of pipes did not remove these needs. It placed them directly into somebody's hands. Even the word bath could cover more than one action. A person might wash thoroughly while standing or sitting beside a vessel. A foot bath answered one kind of dirt. A warm soak answered another need. Advice manuals recommended practices associated with health and propriety, but recommendations moved more easily across a printed page than water moved across a yard. The distance between ideal and routine was filled with labour. Fuel was one of the quiet limits. Heating a large quantity of water consumed wood, coal, corn cobs, twisted hay, or whatever a household could obtain in a particular place and year. That fuel had competing claims. It baked bread, cooked meals, heated irons, warmed rooms, and protected people from dangerous cold. Using it for a bath could be reasonable and welcome. It could also be postponed when another need pressed harder. Water had competing claims too. Animals needed it. Food preparation needed it. Dishes, laundry, floors, and sickroom care needed it. A well might be dependable, or it might run low. A creek could rise, freeze, or carry silt. Stored water occupied containers and invited contamination if handled carelessly. Every drop did have a job, but the jobs did not always agree. Privacy may have been the least visible resource of all. One-room and two-room homes demanded coordination. Bathing meant arranging absence, using screens, waiting for children to sleep, or accepting partial washing when seclusion could not be made. The precise solutions differed. The surviving record often leaves them unstated because privacy was maintained partly by not writing intimate details down. That silence should not be filled with a comic invention. It deserves respect. Historians can identify vessels, read advice, examine floor plans and compare recollections. They can say what was possible and what was costly. They cannot watch every Ingalls bath through a wall that no longer stands. The honest boundary is more interesting than folklore because it restores household judgment. The full bath was therefore a project with several stages. First came acquisition, then transport, then heat, then arrangement, then the private act itself, then drying, dressing, floor care and disposal. If clean clothes followed, laundry connected to the bath before the tub had even been filled. One act of bodily care leaned upon another system. The basin returns here with changed meaning. At the smaller wash, it proved that washing could be real without immersion. Beside a full bath, it also becomes a measure of scale. A bowl could be lifted by one set of hands and emptied in one trip. A tub could turn water into a weight that shaped the household evening. The word brutal belongs to that multiplication, not to a fantasy that everyone was cheerfully filthy. Cleanliness might be desired and still be delayed. A warm bath might be enjoyed and still demand work before and after it. A parent could value a child's clean skin while also counting fuel and daylight. These were not contradictions. They were the ordinary economics of care. The project continued after the bather stepped away. A wet floor needed wiping. A portable tub had to be emptied, dried, and returned to storage. Towels and washcloths joined the laundry. Dampness had to escape from the room, instead of settling into bedding or walls. A bath created cleanliness by creating another series of things to clean. Safety entered the arrangement as well. Hot water could scald. A full vessel could be awkward to move. A child could not simply be left beside it. An adult helping someone weak or unsteady had to manage both privacy and balance. These risks were ordinary enough to remain outside most family stories, yet they explain why preparation mattered. Manufacturers offered equipment meant to make bathing easier, but an advertised convenience did not install itself in every home. Folding tubs, specialized baths, improved heaters, and later plumbing belonged to an expanding market whose benefits arrived by income and location. Even a clever portable design left the source and drain outside the room unless somebody supplied the missing work. Bathing also carried emotional and social meanings that the record cannot distribute evenly. Warm water could comfort. A clean body could restore confidence before company or worship. Modesty could make assistance difficult. Historians can identify these possibilities, without placing an invented feeling inside Caroline, Laura, or any other person. The reliable fact is the arrangement around the body. The cleanup also had its own timetable. Water left in a tub cooled and became harder to move comfortably. Damp towels waited for drying, and the room needed air without losing all its warmth. Bathing could be complete while the household work created by it continued indoors through the remaining part of the evening. Once water was ready, another question entered the room. What would touch the skin and cloth? Prairie households did not live in a world without soap. They lived in a world where soap came in different forms, from different sources, with different strengths and costs. The next truth lies in that uneven bar. Soap in the late 19th century was both familiar and variable. Households could encounter hard bars, softer preparations, toilet soaps intended for the body, stronger soaps used for laundry, shaving soaps, and manufactured products promoted through shops and advertisements. Some soap was made at home, some was purchased. Many families likely moved between sources according to cash, location, ingredients, skill, and season. No single recipe can stand for them all. The oldest household method joined fat with an alkali derived from wood ashes. Water passing through ashes could produce a lye solution. Combined under suitable conditions with rendered fat, that alkali transformed the materials into soap. The chemistry worked whether its maker described molecules or judged readiness through experience. It also required care. An overly strong alkali could injure skin, while a poorly balanced batch could be disappointing or waste valuable fat. That risk has encouraged a modern caricature in which all homemade frontier soap was a savage block that burned anyone who touched it. The evidence does not support such a blanket claim. Soap makers developed practical tests and learned through repeated work. A finished product could vary and mistakes were possible. So were competent batches. Skilled household production should not be confused with random mixing. Nor should one famous method be assigned to Caroline Ingalls without a source. She lived in regions where home soap making was known, and Laura's writing belongs to a material world familiar with household production. Yet general practice cannot establish the recipe in one kitchen on one day. The record may support a scene in a text. It does not give permission to decorate the missing parts. Making soap also competed for resources. Fat had a food value and other household uses. Ashes had to be saved and handled. Water was needed. Heat and a suitable vessel were needed. The process took attention, and the result required storage. A household might reasonably buy soap when cash and markets allowed, then make it when ingredients and circumstances favoured production. The choice was practical, not ideological. Commercial soap widened that choice. Industrial production, improved transport, branded packaging and advertising placed more goods within reach over the century. Reach did not mean equal possession. A product advertised in an Eastern magazine was not automatically present in a remote claim shanty. Even when a store stocked it, the price had to compete with flour, lamp fuel, cloth, tools, medicine, school needs, and debt. Body soap and laundry soap also had different jobs. A preparation useful for removing grease from cloth might be harsh for repeated washing of the face. A milder toilet soap could be pleasant but comparatively expensive. Labels, scent, hardness, and appearance carried social meaning along with cleaning power. The small bar beside a basin therefore held chemistry, commerce, and aspiration in the same hand. Soap did not do its work alone. It helped water loosen oils and soil, allowing rubbing and rinsing to carry them away. With cloth, friction mattered. With skin, gentleness mattered. Too little soap might leave dirt. Too much, or soap poorly rinsed away, could irritate. The person washing had to feel the difference, often without a printed instruction suited to the exact water and material before her. Water itself changed soap's behaviour. Minerals in hard water could make lather less generous and leave deposits. Soft water behaved differently. Rainwater, where safely collected and stored, was valued for some washing because of its softness. Again, the general principle does not prove what one family used on a particular morning. It explains why a familiar bar could seem effective in one place and stubborn in another. Soap storage raised another small problem. A wet bar softened. A poorly drained dish wasted material. Strong laundry soap had to be kept away from curious children and mistaken use. Homemade soft soap could occupy a crock or barrel rather than a neat-wrapped bar. The polished television image of soap beside water compresses all of that management into a prop. Advertisements promised ease, purity, beauty, economy, or modern respectability. Their claims reveal what manufacturers believed buyers wanted. They are not neutral proof that every product performed as promised. Still, they show that hygiene belonged to a growing consumer culture. Cleanliness could be sold as labour saved, status gained, skin protected, or family cared for. That consumer language met a household reality that could not be wrapped away. Purchased soap still needed water. It still needed hands. Laundry still needed rubbing, rinsing, drying, and ironing. A branded bar might reduce one uncertainty without eliminating the work around it. Progress often arrived as an improvement inside the chain, not as the disappearance of the chain. For women responsible for much of domestic washing, knowledge of soap was working knowledge. They judged cloth stains, water temperature, colour, and the strength of the cleaning agent. The same mixture could not be used carelessly on every textile. Wool, cotton, linen, coloured fabric, and delicate trim responded differently. A ruined garment represented not only money lost, but sewing and mending time lost too. This is one reason old household manuals can sound intensely particular. They prescribe sorting, soaking, treatment, rinsing, and drying because failure had a cost. Yet their confidence must be read cautiously. A printed author might write for a middle-class home with servants, specialised rooms, and ready supplies. A Prairie household adapted advice to the space, weather, labour, and goods actually available. Soap could carry scent, but scent was not cleanliness itself. Strong perfume might make a product attractive. It could not remove soil without the physical process. Likewise, the absence of perfume did not mean the absence of washing. A plain household soap could be entirely useful. The senses offered clues, not laboratory judgments. The deeper truth is therefore about variation. Soap was not missing from the Prairie world. Certainty was. Its source, quality, strength, price, and purpose shifted, and users supplied the knowledge that made it useful. A careful bar could protect material and skin. A poor choice could create more work. Different fats and alkaline solutions could produce soaps with different textures, colours, and working qualities. A firm pale cake was not automatically milder than a darker soft soap, and scent revealed little about cleaning strength. Users learned a soap by what it did in their water, on their skin, and against cloth. Appearance offered clues, but performance settled the household judgment. Soft soap and hard soap answered different needs. Salt and processing could help produce a harder form, while softer soap could be stored and measured from a container. A household did not necessarily regard one as primitive and the other as modern. Form followed ingredients, intended use, storage, and the work at hand. Commercial manufacture brought more consistent branding, but not perfect transparency. Buyers judged wrappers, merchants, price, reputation, scent, and their own experience. Claims of purity or miraculous economy belong to advertising. The product's existence still does not prove its presence in a particular Ingalls home or any other named frontier household. Soap could also mark the border between private need and public expectation. Clean hands, cuffs, and collars were read by neighbours. A scented toilet soap could be a modest luxury. A strong laundry preparation could be an implement of production. Both sat inside the broad category of hygiene, while asking different things from the user. Soap was also consumed at different rates. Laundry, floors, dishes, hands, and bathing placed unlike demands on the supply, and a household could reserve a stronger preparation for heavy work. That division made storage and labelling practical matters. Confusing one mixture for another risked damaged cloth, irritated skin, or wasted material needlessly. Soap residue could remain in cloth when rinsing was hurried or water was scarce. That residue affected feel, finish, and comfort, so the last clear water mattered as much as the suds. Cleaning power had to be followed by removal, another judgment supplied by the worker. Once the rinsing ended, cleanliness did not stop at the body. It moved into fabric. The layer nearest the skin absorbed sweat and soil, while aprons and coverings shielded the garments that were harder to wash. Much of that system remained literally out of sight. Clothing allowed a household to move cleanliness away from the skin and into layers. A washable underlayer could receive perspiration and body oils before they reached a heavier dress, waistcoat, or coat. An apron could catch flour, soot, milk, mud, and cooking splashes before they reached the clothing beneath. Collars, cuffs, stockings, petticoats, shirts, drawers, and shifts varied by period, age, means, and personal practice. Their shared logic was protection. This was not a secret technology. It was material common sense shaped by the cost of cloth and labour. Outer garments might be difficult to wash, slow to dry, prone to shrinking, or vulnerable to fading and damage. Some were brushed, aired, spot-cleaned, or carefully stored rather than plunged into a tub. The layer that could be changed and washed carried much of the hygienic burden. For a television wardrobe, a clean apron reads instantly. It tells the audience that a woman is orderly, competent, and ready for the day's scene. In a working household, that apron had a past. Cloth had been bought or woven, cut, sewn, worn, stained, washed, dried, perhaps starched, ironed, patched, and tied on again. The symbol of neatness was also a maintenance record. Laura Ingalls is remembered through images of disciplined domestic order, though books, autobiography, family record, and television character must remain distinct. The historical Caroline moved repeatedly and managed households under changing circumstances. The literary Ma was shaped by Laura's selection and language. The television figure was shaped again by writers, actors, costume departments, and a weekly story. One clean costume cannot report all three lives. Laura's surviving garments and material associations, where provenance is secure, can show construction, taste, and wear. They still cannot reveal every private routine. Clothing tells historians through seams, repairs, stains, altered hems, and fabric choices, but only when the object is authenticated and interpreted carefully. A generic Prairie dress should never be silently promoted into an Ingalls dress. Airing extended the life of cloth and bedding. Fresh-moving air could carry away dampness and odours. Sunlight and dry weather could help. Garments might be hung, shaken, brushed, or laid out. None of these actions replaced washing in every case. They formed a broader maintenance system that matched treatment to material and need. Brushing could remove loose soil, hair, dust, and crumbs before they settled deeper. Spot treatment could address one mark without exposing the whole garment to water. Mending closed openings before they widened. Turning a collar, altering a hem, replacing ties, and reinforcing worn places kept a useful item in service. Hygiene, thrift, and clothing repair met in the same lap. The clean layer also helped manage modesty. Underclothing made partial washing and changing possible within limited privacy. A person could replace the fabric nearest the body without exposing every outer garment to a full wash. In a crowded home, that mattered. So did the ability to dress in stages or shield the body while another layer dried. Children complicated the system because they grew, played, fell, spilled, and needed frequent repair. Clothing could be handed down, remade, shortened, lengthened, or patched. A clean child at the start of a school day represented far more than a face at a basin. It represented garments located, fitted, mended, and made ready before the child stepped outside. Laundry frequency depended on the article. It would be wrong to imagine every item entering the same weekly tub, and clothing should not be imagined as never washed at all. Washable linens and underlayers could be treated more often than structured outerwear. Weather, illness, available water, the number of spare garments, and the urgency of farm or wage work all altered timing. Spare clothing was a kind of time. When one set could be worn while another dried, the household gained flexibility. When wardrobes were small, a damp garment could become an immediate problem. Drying delays then reached into school, church, travel, and work. An extra shirt was not merely property. It was breathing room in the domestic schedule. Colour and finish affected the visible standard. White cloth revealed soil quickly and could signal care when clean. It also demanded attention. Bluing could counter a yellow cast in white textiles when properly used, while starch could produce a crisp surface. These treatments belonged to particular garments and circumstances. They were not proof that every prairie wash ended in a brilliant white line. The labour remained gendered without being mechanically identical in every house. Women and girls performed a great share of sewing, mending, washing, and daily clothing care. Men contributed wages, materials, fuel, hauling, construction, and sometimes domestic tasks according to circumstance. The record is clearest about the broad imbalance and less complete about each exchanged favour. Respect does not require turning a family into a diagram. Nor does hardship erase pride or skill. A neatly mended garment could demonstrate economy. A clean collar could prepare someone to enter school, worship, a shop, or a neighbour's home with dignity. These public moments gave private labour social consequence. The person admired for looking tidy was not always the person who had made tidiness possible. That separation is one of the most important truths in the entire story. Results travel with the wearer. Labour often stays behind. A girl reaches school with combed hair and a clean dress, while the damp cloth, cooling iron, saved scraps and tired hands remain in the house. A father enters town in a brushed coat, while the dust removed from it lies near the door. The clean cloth changes meaning here. At first, it seemed like a visible sign of washing. Now it becomes a protective layer and a social passport. It carried care into public view while concealing both the body and the labour that maintained it. A darned edge, a turned cuff, or a carefully stored spare showed how clothing care extended usefulness without requiring another full garment. Advice about neat dress could be moralising. 19th century writers often connected cleanliness with character, discipline, respectability, and good management. Such judgments could punish poor families for conditions created by low wages, bad housing, scarce water, or relentless labour. A clean collar might be praised without anyone asking who had access to soap, time, or a place for it to dry. Prairie families nonetheless made choices within those limits. They brushed what could be brushed, washed what could be washed, and repaired what could still be saved. Their standards were neither modern nor absent. They were practical, visible in places, private in others, and always tied to resources. Clothing maintenance also preserved information that written records ignored. A repeated patch showed where strain gathered. A faded shoulder showed exposure to sun. A lengthened hem recorded growth. None of these marks speaks by itself, and many working garments did not survive. Still, the material method reminds historians that neatness had a history before the photograph or public visit. Clean underlayers reduced some soil reaching out to garments, but they did not make the body or house self-cleaning. They transferred the burden into wash day. That transfer was useful because washable cloth could be treated more directly than a fitted wool dress or coat. It also concentrated work into a demanding cycle. Garment construction could make maintenance easier. Collars, cuffs, aprons, and other exposed pieces might be replaced or washed more often than the larger garment they protected. Buttons, hooks, ties, and seams also determined whether a piece could survive soaking and rubbing. The design of clothing therefore shaped the cleaning method long before water ever reached the tub or board. Material survival therefore favours the garment protected from daily damage, the photograph taken after preparation, and the object sturdy enough to keep. The most washed layer often disappeared first, taking much of its maintenance history with it. For a listener returning to these details, one simple image is enough now. A clean layer rests between skin and the difficult world. It takes soil, protects dearer cloth, preserves modesty, and then enters the wash. The first household question now has a clear answer. It was not only a tub, it was a basin, a cloth, a bar of soap, a change of linen, an aired garment, and the judgment that joined them. The next movement begins when those objects become heavy. Cloth that protects the body eventually meets water, and once it is soaked, every pound of care must be lifted again. Sooner or later, every clean layer reached the same place. The apron that guarded a dress, the cloth worn near the skin, the towel beside the basin, and the sheet on the bed all had to be washed. Their usefulness did not remove labour from the household. It gathered that labour into wash day. Dry cloth can be folded into a light stack. Wet cloth is another material entirely. Water enters the threads and gives every shirt, sheet and underlayer a dragging weight. A piece that could be lifted with 2 fingers in the morning might need both hands once it had been soaked, rubbed, rinsed, and lifted from a tub. That weight helps explain why laundry was never one simple action. It was a chain of actions, and nearly every link depended on water. Water was needed for soaking, washing, and rinsing. More was needed when the first wash liquor became too dirty to use, and all of it had to arrive before it could carry anything away. In a house without a pipe, arrival meant a pail, a spring, a creek, a well, a pump, or a stored supply. The exact source changed with the place and season. The fact of carrying did not. A family near a reliable well faced a different walk from one using surface water, but neither could turn a tap and forget the distance. Water alone was not enough. Some had to be warmed, and heavier washing could require a large kettle or boiler near a stove or fire. That asked for fuel, a vessel, space, and attention. The household was therefore spending wood, or another scarce fuel before the first stain had begun to loosen. Laundry often began with judgment rather than force. Pieces could be sorted by colour, fabric, soil, and intended use. A sturdy work cloth could endure treatment that might damage a finer garment. White goods, coloured goods, wool, and delicate trims did not all invite the same water, soap, heat, or handling. This was one reason skill mattered. A woman who understood cloth was not merely attacking dirt, she was deciding what the fabric could bear, which mark needed attention, and which treatment might create a worse problem than the one it solved. An expensive garment damaged in washing could not always be easily replaced. Soaking allowed water time to enter the fibres. Soap helped loosen grease and soil, though the kind of soap mattered. A strong, soft soap suited to laundry was not necessarily the soap anyone would choose for a face or hands. A milder purchase cake and a household batch made for heavy washing belonged to the same broad history, but they were not interchangeable. The common picture of a pioneer woman making every ounce of soap from ashen fat is too tidy. Some households made soap, some bought it when stores, money and transport allowed. Some did both at different times. By the later 19th century, commercial soap was increasingly visible, yet a product on a shelf did not mean that every remote family could afford it or obtain it regularly. When household soap was made, its strength depended on materials and control. Alkali and fat had to be brought into a workable balance. A poorly balanced batch or soap meant for hard laundry could irritate skin, but it would be wrong to describe every homemade soap as a dangerous block of lye. The truth is quieter. Soap making required knowledge, and results could vary. Once soak-in and soap had done what they could, cloth still needed movement. It might be rubbed between the hands, worked against itself, or moved over a ridged washing surface. Washboards existed in many forms, and manufactured examples became more available across the century. Their presence in museums proves that the tool existed, not that a particular Ingalls home owned a particular board. The board did not perform the washing on its own. It gave the hands a surface against which soap, water, cloth and pressure could work together. Too little movement might leave soil in place. Too much could wear the fabric. The same repeated motion that made the cloth cleaner could also shorten its life. Boiling was useful for some sturdy white household linens, but it was not a universal treatment for every garment. Heat could assist with heavy soil and household sanitation, yet dyes could run and fibres could be harmed. The popular image of every item rolling in a great copper boiler flattens a much more careful set of choices. Then came rinsing. Soap left in cloth could make it stiff, unpleasant or difficult to finish. One rinse might not be enough, especially after heavy washing. Fresh water had to enter the process again, and used water had to leave it. The household was carrying not only the beginning of the work, but its residue. Used wash water did not disappear when it crossed the threshold. It was poured or carried somewhere according to the house, yard, weather, and local practice. That small movement already joined cleanliness to drainage. The connection would become more important when the story reached wells, privies, and the ground beneath them. Before any cloth could dry, much of its water had to be pressed or twisted out. Wringing by hand required grip and leverage. A large sheet could fold into itself, resist the hands, and hold more water than its dry shape suggested. Two people could manage a bulky piece more easily, though no surviving record allows every such task to be assigned to a named member of the Ingalls family. Mechanical wringers reduced some of this work where they were available. 19th century trade catalogues and surviving machines show a market eager to promise relief from washing and wringing. Yet invention and possession are different facts. A machine could exist in a catalogue, in a town, or in a neighbour's house without entering every homestead kitchen. The same caution applies to washing machines. Hand-powered devices appeared long before indoor plumbing became ordinary. Some were ingenious, and some were advertised as answers to one of housekeeping's hardest burdens. Their existence reveals how widely the burden was recognised. It does not turn Prairie wash day into a mechanised routine. Clean wet cloth then needed air, space, and weather. It might hang on a line, lie over a rail, rest on bushes or grass where appropriate, or dry indoors when conditions demanded. Sun and moving air helped, but rain could undo the timing, dust could settle again, and freezing weather could transform flexible cloth into a stiff shape. Drying indoors brought another set of limits. Damp cloth released moisture into already crowded rooms. It occupied chairs, lines, rafters, or whatever safe space could be spared. It also had to remain clear of flame and hot stove surfaces. The wash was no longer in the tub, but it was still using the house. White cloth sometimes received bluing, a carefully controlled blue tint that made yellowed fabric appear whiter. Other pieces could be starched when stiffness and finish were wanted. These were not proof that every household performed the same ritual every week. They were skilled finishing options, documented in the period and remembered in literary accounts that show cleanliness included appearance as well as removal of soil. Bluing had to be diluted and distributed. Too much could leave a visible cast or spots. Starch also required preparation and judgment, since a pleasing finish depended on the strength of the mixture and the kind of cloth. Neither step fits the idea that laundry was merely a rough struggle with a bar of soap. Ironing added heat after all the earlier heat. Flat irons had to be warmed, tested, used, returned to the stove, and exchanged as they cooled. A surface that was too cool did little. One that was too hot could scorch. The iron itself had weight, and it moved over clothing that had already been carried through every other stage. Some households used several irons in rotation, so one could heat while another was in the hand. A clean stove surface, a holder, and a protected ironing table or board all mattered. The work asked for attention, even when its motions looked repetitive. A moment of inattention could mark the very cloth the washing had been meant to preserve. Period household advice often assigned washing and ironing to different days. Other evidence describes laundry occupying several days before equipment reduced part of the burden. That does not create one universal schedule for the Prairie. It does show why a clean stack in a cupboard represented much more than the final folding. In the Little House world, Caroline appears again and again as the organizer of domestic order, while Laura's later writing preserves selected household acts. The books are not a timesheet, and they do not record every pail or every turn of a sheet. They give the visible pieces of memory. Broader material evidence helps reveal the process surrounding those pieces without pretending to know the family's exact routine. Older girls in many households learned laundry as part of domestic work, but each named task still needs its own record before it can be placed into Mary's, Laura's, or Carrie's hands. Charles and other men could contribute through water, fuel, equipment, and construction. The burden was strongly gendered, yet the household system depended on several kinds of labour meeting at the tub. If sleepers carried away part of the process, the cloth itself is enough to find the path again. It entered dry. Water made it heavy. Heat, soap, rubbing, rinsing, wringing, air and sometimes bluing, starch, and ironing turned it into the clean layer the family needed. The finished garment hid that sequence very well. A clean collar did not display the pails that filled the tub. A smooth apron did not show the fuel beneath the kettle. A folded sheet gave no sign of its wet weight. This was one of the quiet powers of domestic work. Success made the work vanish from view. It also made repetition easy to overlook. The clean stack was never permanent. Bodies, cooking smoke, dust, mud, bedding, illness, and ordinary wear began the cycle again. Laundry did not solve dirt once. It kept negotiating with it, week after week, according to weather, supply, and need. The people doing that work were not only producing a pleasing scene. Clean cloth protected skin, absorbed sweat, separated the body from costly outer clothing, freshened beds, and supported care during sickness. Appearance mattered, but so did comfort and use. A household's cloth was part of how it managed the body. That is why the next part of the work begins where wash day seems to end. Hair gathered dust even when a dress was clean. Bedding held warmth, skin flakes, and the traces of crowded sleep. Combs, sheets, seams, sunlight, and air continued the same effort in smaller, more frequent forms. The clean sheet on a bed was only one part of keeping that bed in order. Bedding could be shaken, turned, aired, brushed, and exposed to sun when weather and space allowed. These actions required less water than a full wash, which made them useful between heavier laundry days. Sunlight and moving air helped dry lingering damp and freshen cloth. Mattresses and filled ticks could be moved or opened according to their construction and need. Straw-filled bedding existed in many 19th century households, but no general example should be assigned automatically to one Ingalls bed or one fixed yearly routine. Beds collected more than visible dirt. Warm seams and crevices could shelter insects in any crowded 19th century setting. Archaeology and household advice show that fleas, lice, bedbugs, and other pests were familiar concerns. Familiar does not mean universal, and it does not prove that a named family had an infestation at a particular time. That distinction protects the people in the story from an easy insult. Parasites are not evidence of moral failure. They travel with bodies, clothing, animals, luggage, used furniture, and close living. A careful household could still face them, just as a clean-looking bed could still require inspection. Management began with attention. Seams could be checked, bedding shaken, washable pieces cleaned, and sleeping materials aired. Heat, sun, laundering, brushing, and the cleaning of nearby cracks All had roles in period practice. Which method was used depended on what was available and what problem had actually appeared. Some historical remedies were unpleasant, flammable, toxic, or simply ineffective. They belong in the record, but there is no need to repeat every harsh recipe. The important truth is that people noticed pests, tried to control them, and worked with an incomplete understanding of their life cycles and risks. Hair demanded a similar kind of regular attention. Modern listeners often measure hair cleanliness by shampoo and frequent washing. That standard does not fit the 19th century very well. Hair care placed greater emphasis on combing, brushing, arranging and controlling dandruff or parasites than on washing the hair with a modern bottled product. The word shampoo itself carried changing meanings before it became the familiar routine sold in modern bottles. Products specifically marketed for hair washing became more common later. In the Ingalls era, a clean and orderly head of hair could be maintained through methods that did not resemble a present morning shower. Combing separated strands and removed loose material. Brushing distributed natural oils and helped arrange the hair. Braids and pin styles kept long hair controlled during work. A bonnet protected from sun and weather, though a bonnet cannot establish that every covered head concealed hair left unwashed beneath it. Laura's braids are a powerful part of the visual memory of Little House, but the image is not a laboratory report. It shows arrangement and identity. It does not tell how often the real Laura washed her hair, what preparation she used, or whether a particular scalp problem existed. Those details remain outside the surviving record. Fine-toothed combs could also help detect or remove lice when lice were present. Their existence is evidence of a practical tool, not of a diagnosis. The safest historical language stays with management and risk. It does not place insects into a child's hair merely because the tool was known. Hair washing, when undertaken, created its own domestic problem. Long hair holds water, takes time to dry, and can chill the head and shoulders in cold weather. Warmth, privacy, available water, and time therefore mattered. Season could change what was practical without changing whether order and grooming mattered. Soap was not always ideal for hair. A strong laundry soap could be harsh, while specialized preparations varied in availability and quality. Some commercial hair products made claims about dandruff, growth, color, and beauty. Museum collections show both the ingenuity of the market and the dangers of assuming that every advertised product was safe or widely used. The household record preserves purchased bottles and printed labels more readily than it preserves a plain comb used for years. It preserves a fine brush more readily than the daily minutes spent drawing it through tangled hair. Material history is therefore rich in objects but quieter about repetition. That silence resembles the silence around wash day. The finished braid hides the detangling. The smooth bed hides the shaking and airing. A clean pillowcase hides the basin, the rinse water, and the line. Once again, household order is visible while the work producing it recedes. Mary, Laura, and Carrie lived within that household order, but the evidence does not authorize a neat assignment of each comb, sheet, or mattress task. It is enough to say that girls in 19th century households often learned such work, and that Caroline's domestic management remains a recurring feature of Wilder's account. Exact duties require exact evidence. The house itself affected every effort. A tight finished room presented different seams and surfaces from a dugout or rough cabin. Dust from a road, smoke from a stove, damp from the ground, and contact with animals changed how often brushing and airing were useful. Cleanliness was always being negotiated with place. For anyone drifting in and out, the comb and the sheet offer a gentle return. Neither depended on a full bath to be useful. Both belong to the smaller maintenance that filled the days between major washing, keeping bodies and beds orderly with less water, but no absence of labour. This work also changed the meaning of pests. They were not a comic sign that earlier people tolerated filth. They were a practical risk in a world of close rooms, washable and unwashed materials, travel, animals, and limited treatments. The response was inspection, cleaning, airing, and whatever sound remedy the household could obtain. The bed and the head were intimate places, yet they were still connected to the shared economy of cloth. A sheet had to enter wash day. A towel used on hair had to be rinsed and dried. A comb needed care. Small objects carried the work forward after the larger tub had been emptied. Before the comb gives way completely to the mouth, its own maintenance deserves one last look. Teeth caught loose hair and dust, while a brush gathered oils and whatever it lifted from the scalp. Cleaning the tool was part of keeping it useful, although no family record here identifies a particular method or schedule. Head coverings and hair fastenings also stood between grooming and laundry. A ribbon, cap, or bonnet lining could collect perspiration and soil even when the hair beneath remained neatly arranged. Those smaller textiles entered the cycle of brushing, spot care, washing, drying, and repair, according to their material. These details make grooming a form of maintenance rather than a dramatic cleansing scene. Hair stayed clear of work, bedding received air when conditions allowed, and small tools remained serviceable through attention. The comb and sheet settled together, one beside the body and one beneath it, each carrying a quieter share of care. With the comb beside the sheet, the washboard and bluing bag can rest. The lost arts of the homestead can be found at prairiesecrets.com. You can scan the QR code on your screen, and if you're listening on your phone, the links are waiting in the description and the pinned comments. There is no pressure. It will be there when morning comes. One small object leads naturally to another. The teeth of a comb kept hair in order. A very different kind of brush, sometimes no larger than a finger, belonged to the mouth. Its history corrects another simple frontier myth, because dental tools did not suddenly appear after the Prairie years. That smaller brush belongs to a history much older than many frontier stories suggest. Toothbrushes existed before the Ingalls children were born, and 19th century households could also encounter tooth powders, tooth washes, picks, cloths, and printed advice about cleaning the mouth. The false choice between a modern bathroom and no dental care at all leaves most of that history out. Existence, however, is not ownership. A brush in a museum case proves that such brushes were made. An advertisement proves that a merchant wanted to sell one. A household manual proves that an author recommended a practice. None of those sources, standing alone, places a particular brush in Caroline Ingalls' hand or beside Laura's bed. That difference matters especially here, because the little house memory feels so complete. Readers know the food on the table, the sound of a fiddle, and the arrangement of familiar rooms. It is tempting to fill every unmentioned corner with whatever a comparable household might have owned. Responsible history leaves the corner empty when the record does. The brushes of the period came in different forms and qualities. Handles might be made from bone, wood, or other material, with bristles fixed into the head. Manufactured brushes became more available as production and distribution expanded. Their price, durability, and reach into a remote market still varied. Dentifrice is simply a preparation used to clean the teeth. Powders were common forms, and recipes or commercial products could include chalk and other abrasive materials. Abrasion could remove deposits, but a mixture that was too rough could also wear the surface it was meant to clean. A product called a tooth powder was not automatically gentle or effective. A widely circulated household manual from 1869 recommended regular attention to the teeth and described both brushing and cleaning between them. That is strong evidence that dental care belonged to respectable household advice. It is still prescriptive evidence. It tells what reform-minded authors wanted readers to do, not how faithfully every rural family followed the instruction. Commercial goods add another layer. A powder sold under the name of Dr. Lion was on the market by 1874. Other dentifrices appeared in bottles, boxes, and decorated tins. Such products show that the market for a clean mouth was already established during the Ingalls era, not that one particular family purchased a named brand. Advertisements often promise more than cleanliness. They could offer beauty, sweetness of breath, preservation, or relief from discomfort. Those claims belong to commercial persuasion, not neutral medical proof. A store shelf can show what was available. It cannot show what worked, what was affordable, or what was used each morning. Households also managed the mouth with simpler means when a manufactured brush or powder was unavailable. Historical references mention cloth and other improvised cleaning methods, but broad possibility should not be turned into an Ingalls scene. The secure conclusion is modest. People understood that teeth needed attention, while tools, ingredients, habits, and professional care varied widely. The same limits apply to frequency. Advice to clean after meals does not demonstrate that every person did so. A childhood book that omits tooth cleaning does not prove neglect. Repetition often disappears from narrative because nothing dramatic changes when a familiar task is completed again. Dental trouble was common in the 19th century, but it was not produced by one simple absence of brushes. Diet, access to care, the condition of teeth, illness, injury, tools, and habits all mattered. The point does not require the spectacle of extraction to make its point. Ordinary preventive care was already part of the culture, even when it was uneven. For a Prairie household, the mouth joined the same resource system as the basin. A brush or cloth required a little water. Powders had to be made or bought. Tools needed keeping, drying, and replacement as their bristles or other working surfaces wore down through use. Even a small act depended on access and routine. A small tooth powder tin is representative, not authenticated. It stands for a category of goods becoming easier to market across towns and rail lines. It does not claim a place on an Ingalls shelf. That distinction keeps an evocative object from becoming false family evidence. There is also a useful contrast between what survives and what vanishes. A branded tin may enter a collection because it bears a label. A plain-worn cloth may be discarded. The quiet act of cleaning the teeth leaves almost no trace at all. History can look more commercial than daily life simply because packages survive better than habits. Before the record turns fully inward, one more feature of the toothbrush deserves attention. A handle might last longer than its bristles. Bristles bent, loosened, and held moisture, so the usefulness of a brush changed with wear. The existence of a durable handle does not tell how long a household kept it, or when it was replaced. Period advice sometimes recommended passing silk between the teeth, showing that cleaning between them was not a modern invention. Such advice assumed access to suitable thread, steady hands, and instruction to use it safely. It demonstrates an available idea, not a universal habit, and it says nothing about what Ingalls' family kept. Household cleaning could prevent some trouble, but it could not repair every damaged tooth. Professional help depended on a practitioner being reachable, the family having money, and treatment being tolerable or trusted. Rural distance widened that gap. A brush and powder might be available at home when dental treatment remained difficult to obtain. Brush making joined several trades. A handle had to be shaped, drilled, and filled with bundles of bristle, then finished for sale. Manufactured uniformity could lower cost and widen supply, yet the object still wore out through use. Its construction helps explain why a toothbrush was a possession to maintain, not a disposable modern convenience. That problem grows sharper when the object was private, ordinary, and deliberately kept from public view. The record has much less to say about the recurring bodily care of women and girls. There, honesty depends not on finding a colourful substitute for missing evidence, but on naming what broad history supports and what no family record reveals. Menstruation belonged to the ordinary life of women and older girls, yet it appears only faintly in many household records. The silence does not mean the work was absent. It means that an intimate, repetitive practice often left little durable material and little written description. Before mass-produced disposable pads became widespread in the early 20th century, many women used absorbent cloth that could be washed and used again. Commercial reusable and disposable products began to appear in the later 19th century, but their existence did not make them ordinary in every household. Markets reach people unevenly, and private homemade arrangements rarely entered catalogues or museums. The broad practice is well supported. The exact Ingalls practice is not. No surviving source used here tells what Carolyn, Mary, Laura, Carrie or Grace used, how it was arranged, who washed it, or where it dried. A folded cloth cannot be placed in a named girl's hand merely because cloth was common elsewhere. That boundary is not a failure of the story. It is part of the story. Historical records preserve unusual purchases, public events, letters, tools with labels, and scenes an author chose to include. A plain piece of reused fabric, washed in private and eventually discarded, was unlikely to survive as an heirloom. Writing also followed social boundaries. People could record weather, travel, births, deaths, crops, and visits, while leaving menstruation unnamed. Silence may reflect privacy, convention, the ordinary nature of the event, or the simple fact that the writer saw no reason to explain it. It cannot safely be assigned one motive. What can be recovered is the labour surrounding the likely practice in many households. Reusable cloth needed water. It needed washing, rinsing, drying, and storage. Those needs joined menstruation to the same basin, soap, cloth supply, weather and privacy already shaping the rest of household cleanliness. Privacy was not a separate room that could always be closed. Cabins, dugouts, and small houses brought family members near one another. A person still needed ways to change, wash, dry, and store cloth without turning an intimate bodily cycle into public household business. How any named family managed that remains unknown. The uncertainty calls for restraint, not drama. There is no need to invent embarrassment, pain, secrecy, or conversation. Women differed, bodies differed, and conditions differed. The record supports recurring material work. It does not support one imagined emotional scene. Soap also required care. A laundry strength preparation might not suit sensitive skin, while limited water could complicate rinsing. That does not justify a universal claim of injury or chafing. It simply shows why the type of soap, the availability of clean cloth, and the chance to dry it thoroughly could matter. Drying was both practical and private. Damp cloth stored too soon could become unpleasant, while visible drying might conflict with household convention. Historical evidence rarely tells exactly how one family solved that small problem. The absence is especially revealing because the physical work had to be completed, whether or not anyone later wrote about it. This is one place where the neatness of a television cabin can compress more than a chore. A screen can show a mother and daughters moving through years without making menstruation part of the continuing domestic system. That is different from claiming no adaptation ever hinted at women's bodily life. The title's promise rests on accumulated labour, not a literal audit of every scene. The books require the same distinction. Wilder shaped remembered experience into literary works written long afterward and edited for publication. What she chose not to narrate cannot be treated as proof that nothing happened. Nor can an omission be filled with a routine borrowed from a museum label and presented as family memory. For listeners who know these characters through affection, restraint is a form of respect. It allows Caroline and the girls to remain historical people rather than examples in a catalogue of discomforts. Their private bodies do not need to be exposed for the work around them to be recognised. The work also belonged within the larger economy of cloth. A household had only so much suitable fabric. Pieces wore out, needed cleaning, and had to be kept separate according to use. Commercial goods could later widen the choices, but availability on a town shelf did not instantly remove washing or privacy from the task. This quiet record gap changes the meaning of the clean cloth. Earlier, cloth protected the body and the outer dress. Here, it becomes an object of intimate care whose history is broadly visible, while its family use remains properly hidden. The object gains meaning without requiring an invented scene. It also shows why women's labour can disappear twice. First, successful cleaning removes the visible sign of the work. Then custom and record keeping remove the description. What remains is a smooth narrative surface over a cycle that still required water, time, material, and judgment. The conclusion is therefore bounded. Menstrual care was part of 19th century domestic life, and washable cloth was common before mass disposables. It added washing and privacy needs. No surviving record used here establishes the Ingalls women's exact method, and the unknown stays unknown. One final material limit remains. Cloth suitable for intimate care had to be absorbent, reasonably soft, washable, and available. Those qualities mattered, but the evidence does not identify one preferred fabric for every woman or one supply kept by the Ingalls family. Folded layers could increase absorbency without requiring a specially manufactured shape. The number of layers, the size of each piece, and the way cloth was secured varied among women and circumstances. Historical collections cannot supply one standard pattern. The broad evidence supports washable material, while the practical arrangement remains diverse and largely undocumented. Keeping a clean reserve required suitable cloth to be washed, dried thoroughly, and stored for another cycle. That reserve competed with other household uses for fabric and laundry time. Scarcity narrowed choices without identifying any Ingalls woman's method. Privacy shaped storage as well as use. Fresh cloth needed protection from general handling, while used cloth required a discreet place before washing. The strongest evidence supports the practical need, not one universal container or location. Every exact Ingalls arrangement remains beyond the surviving record. From that private silence, the household path turns outward. Water used for bodies and cloth had to leave the living space. Chamber pots, privies, pits, paths, and the ground itself handled another daily need. Once waste crossed the back door, it could look removed while still remaining part of the household surroundings. The chamber pot belonged to the inside edge of waste management. It allowed a person to avoid a dark, cold, muddy, or unsafe walk to an outdoor privy, especially at night or during illness. Surviving objects and household records show that such vessels were familiar. They do not prove that every family used the same shape, name, or routine. A chamber pot still created work after it had served its purpose. It had to be carried, emptied, rinsed, and returned. The exact timing depended on need and household practice. The popular claim that every pot was emptied at the same hour each morning turns a sensible pattern into a rule the evidence cannot support. The vessel also required a destination. Waste carried out of a room did not cease to exist. It entered a privy pit, another disposal place, or a local system shaped by the property and period. The clean interior was therefore connected to a less visible landscape of paths, pits, soil, and water. An outdoor privy was simple infrastructure, but simple did not mean meaningless. It might be a small structure over a pit, with a seat, walls, a door, and some provision for air and privacy. Construction varied. So did maintenance, placement, and the length of time one pit could be used. No single distance separated every privy from every house or well. Terrain mattered. Drainage mattered. The location of water, the slope of the land, the property line, convenience, winter weather, town rules, and local knowledge could all shape placement. A fixed measurement repeated across frontier stories should not be placed into the Ingalls yard without direct evidence. Distance from the house involved a trade. A structure set farther away might reduce odour near the door and create more separation from living space. It also lengthened the walk in rain, snow, darkness, illness, or urgent need. A nearer structure was easier to reach but brought its own concerns. The path itself became part of hygiene. Mud could return on shoes, snow could cover the way, ice could make a short walk difficult. In a small household, the need for privacy had to coexist with the practical fact that everyone knew where the path led. Paper for personal cleaning existed in several forms during the 19th century, including commercial products later in the period. Households also used other available materials according to place and supply. The evidence does not support choosing one colourful substitute and declaring it the Ingalls custom. Availability is not ownership, and folklore is not an inventory. The same rule protects the story from a familiar catalogue joke. A mail order book could be reused in some places after such catalogues became available, but that fact is neither timeless nor universal. The history of paper, commerce, and household use changed across the very decades covered here. Privy maintenance also varied. Earth, ash, or other material might be used in some settings to cover waste or manage odour. A pit could eventually be closed, moved, or emptied according to local conditions. Institutional and archaeological evidence establishes the range of practices more securely than any one tidy frontier formula. Archaeology finds privies valuable for reasons their users never intended. Filled pits can preserve broken household objects, food remains, medicine containers, seeds, parasite evidence, and discarded goods. Such deposits reveal diet, health, consumption, and daily life. They still speak for a particular site, not every prairie family. This evidence also corrects the idea that sanitation begins only with modern plumbing. A privy was a deliberate attempt to separate waste from living rooms. A chamber pot was a tool for managing bodily need within the limits of night, weather, health, and privacy. Both were parts of a system, even when the system had serious limits. One limit was cleaning the tools themselves. A pot, seat, door latch, and nearby floor could require attention. Water and cloth used for that cleaning then needed disposal. The work could fall within domestic labour without leaving a detailed account of who performed it on a named day. Carolyn's household management gives the story a human centre, but it does not authorise an invented morning scene at the privy. Laura's books select moments. They do not preserve a complete schedule of bodily care. A responsible boundary keeps the family near without turning broader evidence into a family inventory. For anyone returning to the story here, the movement is simple. The basin brought water into the household. Laundry and bodily care used it. Chamber pots and privies carried waste outward. What looked like separate chores was becoming a connected arrangement between the house and the land. The connection was not always visible. A covered pit hid waste from sight. Soil seemed solid and dependable. A well or spring might look clear. Without later knowledge of microbes and groundwater movement, visual separation could feel like real separation. People were not therefore indifferent or foolish. They worked with the knowledge, land, tools, and advice available to them. Some communities issued rules or improved facilities. Some householders paid close attention to drainage and cleanliness. Uneven knowledge and the uneven resources meant that a sound intention did not always create a safe result. Odour influenced many historical ideas about danger. Foul air was widely associated with disease, and avoiding strong smells could encourage useful removal and cleaning even when the explanation was incomplete. Yet a place without a strong smell was not necessarily free of contamination. The nose could warn, but it could not test water. Flies and other insects could move between waste and food, though the full mechanisms were not always understood. This does not require a lingering description. It is enough to see that putting waste beyond the door reduced one kind of contact while leaving other paths open. The ground created the most consequential path. Rain and melting snow moved through soil. Liquid from a poorly placed or heavily used pit could travel according to slope, soil, depth, drainage, and the location of a water source. No single privy created the same risk everywhere, but the mechanism was real. Military posts, towns, farms, and household sites responded differently as sanitation knowledge developed. Fort records and later improvements show growing concern about protecting water from manure, debris, and human waste. These examples establish a regional problem and changing response. They do not prove a specific contamination event at an Ingalls home. That boundary is especially important because illness invites a neat cause. A family becomes sick, a privy, and well exists nearby, and a modern storyteller draws a straight line between them. Unless the record establishes that line, it remains speculation. The record supports general risk without assigning a particular Ingalls illness to dirty water. Waste management carried private and social meanings that should not be flattened into disgust alone. Privacy, dignity, convenience, labour, and household order all met at the back door. A maintained privy was evidence that people cared where waste went. Its limits were limits of design, knowledge, land and resources, not proof that care was absent. The severity here lies in cold paths, heavy vessels, repeated cleaning, limited privacy, and the hidden consequence of disposal. Removing waste from the room was necessary and useful, yet removal from sight was not the same as removal from the household environment. At this point, cleanliness has widened again. It began with a basin against the skin. It passed through cloth, hair, beds, teeth, and private care. Now it reaches beyond the walls into a pit and the soil around it. The household is not a sealed cabin. It exchanges water and waste with the ground. Archaeology can sometimes show the location, filling, and later use of a pit, while written advice reveals what reformers hoped households would do. Neither source records every trip across one yard. Together they establish a waste system without inventing the Ingalls family's specific private routine. That change condition closes one question and changes the measure of the next. The privy path ends at a pit, but water follows paths of its own. When the next pail rises from a well looking clear and cold, the basin will mean more than the labour of carrying it. It will also carry the question of where that water has been. The path beyond the back door did not really end at the privy. It continued downward, through soil that looked solid and quiet, and sometimes sideways with rain or melting snow. Somewhere else on the property, a well or another water source reached into that same ground. The two places could seem separate to the eye while remaining connected beneath it. That connection changes the meaning of nearly every clean thing in the house. A swept floor, a scrubbed collar, and a shining milk pan were visible achievements. Water could also look clear in a cup and carry danger too small to see. Order and safety often travelled together, but they were never exactly the same thing. Before piped water and sewers became ordinary, many American households depended on wells, cisterns, springs, streams, or water carried from a neighbouring source. Their arrangements varied with place, money, soil, weather and settlement. A town lot created one set of pressures, while a farm with more land created another. No single map can be laid over every Ingalls home, and no surviving record follows every bucket from source to table. The general problem, however, is well documented. A privy pit held waste in the ground, while a well drew water from the ground. Rain could wash material across the surface, and water moving below the surface could carry contamination in ways no family could watch. Cracks, loose covers, shallow digging, poor drainage, and heavy use could add further risk. There was no magical distance that made every arrangement safe. Soil could be tight or porous. The water table could lie deep in one place and close to the surface in another. Slope, rainfall, flooding, frost, rock, and the construction of the well all mattered, which is why a tidy number repeated as a universal frontier rule would be misleading. Families did possess practical knowledge about water. They could notice a muddy source, a bad smell, a dead animal upstream, a flooded well, or surface refuse near the opening. Communities sometimes moved waste, protected springs, covered wells, or argued about drainage long before laboratory bacteriology gave them a complete explanation. Care did not begin on the day a microbe received a name. Practical knowledge had limits of its own. Water that smelled unpleasant might warn a household away, yet water without smell could still be unsafe. A clear surface did not reveal organisms capable of causing intestinal disease. Taste, colour, and temperature offered useful information, but they could not provide a microscopic examination at the kitchen table. The well itself required care. A cover could keep out leaves, animals, and falling dirt. A sound curb could reduce runoff entering at the top. The rope, chain, bucket, pump handle, and hands around them formed another chain of contact. Even a well placed with care could be compromised by damage, flooding, or careless handling. Other sources carried different vulnerabilities. A cistern gathered water that had crossed a roof, gutter, or collection surface, bringing whatever dust and debris lay there. A stream reflected activity upstream as well as the condition of the bank beside a family's pail. Each source required its own kind of attention, and none can safely be assigned to every Ingalls home as a permanent arrangement. Storage inside the house added another stage. A covered pail could protect water from ash, insects, and accidental spills. A common dipper made the supply convenient, yet every hand and cup near it created another opportunity for contact. Water could leave a sound source in good condition and change before it reached a mouth or washcloth. Weather altered the whole chain. A dry spell could lower a well and concentrate what remained, while a hard rain could send surface water toward an opening or pit. Flooding could rearrange boundaries that had seemed sensible in ordinary weather. The safe appearance of a yard on one day did not guarantee the same conditions through a season. None of this means a particular Ingalls illness can be assigned to a particular bucket. The family record does not support that kind of certainty. Illnesses remembered in family stories often lacked laboratory diagnosis, and several diseases could produce similar symptoms. The honest conclusion is narrower and more useful. Their world included water risks that household effort could reduce without always being able to identify or remove them. Ideas about those risks changed gradually through the 19th century. Long before most families spoke in the language of germs, observers had linked foul surroundings, drainage, crowding, and certain water supplies with sickness. Investigators in the middle of the century made increasingly persuasive connections between contaminated water and particular outbreaks. Many physicians and officials still disagreed about mechanisms, so older explanations and newer evidence lived beside one another for decades. Sanitary reform therefore did not wait for one dramatic discovery. Towns cleaned streets, inspected nuisances, guarded water sources, and built drainage works for several overlapping reasons. Some actions rested on the belief that foul odours caused disease. Others followed careful patterns in where sickness appeared. Later, laboratory work identified particular organisms and strengthened the case for protected water, sewage control, and cleaner handling. Knowledge also moved unevenly. An article in a city paper did not instantly alter a distant household. Advice had to travel through doctors, newspapers, schools, neighbours, trade catalogues, and local experience. Even when a family accepted it, a safer well, a new pump, or a sewer required money, materials, labour, and public cooperation that advice alone could not supply. Boiling could make biologically contaminated water safer. Although families did not necessarily understand the process in modern terms, heat was already part of cooking, drink making, laundry, and sickroom care. Boiling every drop used for drinking would have demanded more fuel, more vessels, more time, and a reliable way to keep the treated water clean afterward. It should never be inserted into an Ingalls day as a routine without direct evidence. This is the point at which the basin on the table acquires a different weight. Until now, its story has been about quantity. Someone found the water, carried it, warmed it, rationed it, and lifted it away when the washing was done. The ground beneath the privy adds quality to that arithmetic, because a carefully measured basin could still begin with a compromise source. The change does not erase the work that came before it. Washing skin removed sweat and visible soil. Laundering cloth removed grime and many contaminants. Cleaning vessels, covering food, and emptying waste away from living space could all improve comfort and reduce risk. The reframe simply marks the boundary around what those acts could accomplish. A clean cloth could carry cleaner water across a child's face. It could not correct the location of a well, A strong pair of arms could haul enough water for wash day. They could not see what drainage was doing beneath the yard. This was one of the harder limits of household labour, because skill and devotion could meet a problem that belonged partly to land, construction, and community systems. For the women and girls who performed much of the repeated washing, that boundary mattered. Their work was easy to judge by sight. A guest could notice a collar, a flaw, a smell, or a disorderly corner. No one could look at a spotless apron and determine whether the family's water source was protected from every route of contamination. Men's labour and household resources remained part of the same system. Digging, lining, covering, repairing, carrying fuel, and choosing where structures stood could shape the water that reached the basin. On some properties, neighbours or hired workers contributed. In towns, individual effort increasingly met questions that only shared rules, public works, or collective expense could answer. It may help to picture the yard in a gentle rain. Water beads on the well cover, darkens the path, and gathers along a shallow depression. Nothing in that quiet scene announces exactly where each drop will travel. The danger was rarely theatrical. It was ordinary water following the ground available to it. Fort Laramie offers one documented example of this changing understanding. In the later 19th century, a general sink was built as part of an effort to manage waste and protect water at the post. The circumstances of a military site were not those of an Ingalls household, yet the example shows the larger problem clearly. Sanitation depended on arrangements outside the wash basin, as well as cleanliness within it. Archaeology supplies another kind of record. At historic sites, the remains of wells, cisterns, drains, and privies reveal how closely household water and household waste could occupy the same lived space. Those remains sometimes preserve traces of insects, parasites, food, and discarded objects. They can show a system more plainly than a family story written around meals, journeys, and remembered scenes. The television image naturally favoured what a camera could hold. A pail, a pump, a washstand, or a child with a clean face made a readable scene. Soil movement, water tables, and microscopic organisms did not. The series sometimes showed the pieces, but it did not make their continuing connection the burden of the household story. That connection also prevents a simple tale of careless ancestors. A prairie family could care deeply about cleanliness, follow the best advice it knew, and still live with risks created by incomplete knowledge or limited infrastructure. Later generations inherited better explanations and larger public systems, not merely better personal habits. The distinction gives household workers credit without asking them to solve what they could not yet measure. By the time water reached the table, it had already passed through decisions about land, labour, weather, and storage. It then entered another delicate system. The same water-rinsed cups, washed a milk pan, dampened a dishcloth, and touched the food that had to last through a warm afternoon. The coolest corner of the house could slow the next problem, though it could never make time stand still. Fresh milk arrived with its own clock already running. It carried nourishment in a form that also changed quickly, especially in warm weather. Without mechanical refrigeration, a household managed that clock through cleanliness, shade, cool storage, prompt use, and transformations such as butter or cheese. None of those methods made spoilage disappear, but each could buy useful time. The exact arrangement depended on the home. Some families had a cellar, spring house, milk room, cool pantry, or shaded outdoor place. Others worked with the coolest shelf or corner they could find. A vessel might stand in cool water where conditions allowed, yet that was an option rather than a universal prairie scene. Temperature mattered because warmth encouraged change. On a cool day, milk and cooked food might remain usable longer. In summer, the safe and pleasant interval narrowed. A household learned the rhythm through repeated experience, although experience could detect souring more readily than every invisible danger. Milk began its household life in a pail, and the pail mattered. Old residue could sour a fresh supply more quickly and give it an unwanted taste. Dairy advice from the period placed great emphasis on clean vessels, prompt rinsing, thorough washing, and scalding where enough hot water was available. Such advice shows what reformers and experienced housekeepers valued, not a diary of exactly what Caroline Ingalls did after every milking. The work was exacting because milk fat clung to surfaces. A quick pass through cool water might leave a film behind. Hot water helped, but hot water had to be made. The vessel then needed to dry where it would not immediately collect dust, ash, insects, or the odours of nearby work. Material changed the task. Wood could hold odours in worn places. Seams and scratches could shelter residue. Smooth metal or glazed surfaces offered advantages when they were sound, though every vessel still depended on handling and care. The cleanest available pan was only as useful as the water, cloth, shelf, and hands around it. Housekeeping manuals often sound very certain about these matters. They prescribe bright pans, sweet cloths, fresh air, quick attention, and a place reserved for milk. Their precision can be valuable evidence about standards and problems. It cannot prove that a household with a small stove, a sick child, frozen water, or an urgent chore could meet every standard every day. The coolest corner was therefore part of a chain rather than a complete solution. Cooling slowed many changes. It did not sterilize the milk, repair a dirty vessel, or restore food already spoiled. The family still relied on time, smell, appearance, taste, and judgment, all useful signs that remained imperfect. The same judgment governed leftovers and cooked food. A covered vessel could protect food from dust and some insects. Reheating could reduce certain hazards while leaving others untouched, especially if food had stood too long. Drying, salting, smoking, fermenting, and preserving shifted the conditions under which food could last, but each method demanded its own clean tools and careful timing. Dishes returned the problem to the basin. Grease and food scraps had to be removed with the water, soap, heat, and rubbing available. The washing water changed as the work continued. A housekeeper had to decide when it had done enough, and when another trip for water was worth the cost. Dishcloths and towels were small objects with large responsibilities. They wiped hands, caught spills, dried surfaces, and sometimes moved from one task to another. Period advice frequently urged that such cloth be washed, dried, and kept sweet. A damp cloth left folded in warmth could announce trouble through odour long before anyone understood the organisms involved. The order of kitchen work could help limited water do more. A relatively clean cup did not present the same task as a greasy cooking pot. Scraping and wiping away food before washing reduced what entered the basin. Households developed sequences suited to their equipment, though the record gives no reason to assign one exact sequence to Caroline's table. Flies made covers and prompt cleaning more valuable. Families had long treated them as nuisances around food, and later sanitary research clarified their ability to carry contamination. Cloth covers, cupboards, screened openings, and careful removal of scraps could reduce contact where those measures were available. A quiet kitchen without flies was still an achievement dependent on season, building, and materials. Cream, butter, and cheese also belonged to this management of time. Turning milk into another food could preserve part of its value and organise a supply that arrived again with the next milking. The work introduced more surfaces, cloths, paddles, crocks, and hands that needed attention. Preservation did not remove the hygiene problem, it changed its shape. Water used for food preparation required choices of its own. A small amount might rinse produce, thin a dish, or clean a utensil. If the household doubted a source because of flooding or visible disturbance, cooking could offer some protection for food that was thoroughly heated. It could not justify a general claim that every family recognised or managed every waterborne risk. This was skilled practical knowledge, not proof of modern food safety. People knew that sour vessels, stale water, flies, heat, and dirty handling could ruin food. Explanations varied, and some dangers produced no warning that the senses could catch. Later bacteriology clarified why several familiar precautions worked, and why they sometimes failed. For a family with little surplus, spoilage carried more than inconvenience. Lost milk meant lost food and lost labour. Throwing something away could be the safer choice and still be a painful one. The decision belonged to a world in which replacement required another milking, another trip, another fire, or another purchase. Cleanliness in the kitchen was therefore never separate from economy. Fuel used to heat dishwater was fuel not used elsewhere. Water poured away had to be replaced. A cloth put into the wash joined the next load of heavy wet fabric. Every hygienic improvement drew on the same store of time and strength. The television kitchen could show a shining pan and a cloth hanging neatly near the stove. Those objects were honest parts of the world. What disappeared between scenes was their repetition. The pan had to be cleaned after one use and then cleaned again after the next. The record cannot tell us the condition of every Ingalls dishcloth or milk vessel, nor should a general manual be used to accuse the family of failing a rule that may not have fit their place. The stronger conclusion is that food care depended on an interlocking routine, and that each link remained vulnerable to heat, shortage, interruption, and water quality. Once that is clear, the quiet household sounds different. A spoon placed upside down to dry, a pan moved away from the stove, and a cloth spread rather than crumpled are not decorative details. They are small acts of preservation. They make food last a little longer and keep yesterday's residue from entering tomorrow's meal. They also prepare the house for moments when ordinary work becomes care. A cup may need to be carried to a bed. A clean spoon may be wanted more urgently than it was at supper. Water that had served the kitchen now has to wash a face, freshen a sheet, or rinse a vessel beside someone who cannot rise. In that moment, the coolest corner and the cleanest pan remain useful, but the household system tightens. Time is divided between watching, washing, cooking, and resting. The basin returns to the bedside, carrying comfort in its water, and every limitation that followed the water indoors. A sick room on the prairie was not always a room. It might be a bed in the main living space, a quieter corner, or the place nearest the stove when warmth mattered. Household size and the shape of the home determined how much separation was possible. Care had to fit around cooking, children, animals, fuel, and the ordinary work that illness did not suspend. The surviving record rarely follows that care hour by hour. Family narratives preserve memorable illnesses and losses, but they do not inventory every cloth, cup, sheet, or basin. Household manuals describe recommended practice, though recommendations cannot be mistaken for an Ingalls routine. Together, those sources show the kinds of work a sickbed could require, while leaving private moments where they belong. The basin beside the bed was first a vessel of comfort. Water could clean the face and hands, loosen dried soil, cool or warm the skin, and make a person feel less enclosed by illness. A freshly dampened cloth could be gentle when a full washing was impossible. None of those acts required a complete theory of infection to matter. Comfort had its own practical demands. Water had to arrive at a tolerable temperature. A cloth used for one purpose might need washing before another. The basin had to be emptied, rinsed, and returned. If the person needed attention through the night, these small tasks repeated while the rest of the house grew quiet. Period nursing and housekeeping advice often praised fresh air, clean bedding, orderly vessels, light, and the prompt removal of waste. Some recommendations rested on accurate observation. Others were explained through ideas about bad air or bodily balance that modern medicine no longer accepts. A useful practice and an incomplete explanation could exist in the same paragraph. Ventilation is a good example. A close, smoky, crowded room could be uncomfortable, and fresh air could improve it. Opening a door or window also admitted cold, dust, insects, or weather. In winter, every exchange of air asked more from the stove and the fuel pile, so ventilation became a measured household decision rather than a simple command. Bedding carried another part of the burden. Sheets, pillow coverings, blankets, and clothing absorbed sweat, spills, smoke, and the ordinary traces of prolonged use. Changing a layer could restore comfort and dignity. It also created a load that someone had to soak, rub, rinse, wring, dry, and return. The clean cloth has now changed meaning several times. It began as a layer protecting skin and outer clothing. It became the heavy centre of wash day, then a private means of care, and now a small reserve beside a sickbed. Its value lay partly in being available before anyone knew it would be needed. Availability was never guaranteed. A household might have limited spare linen. Wet weather could delay drying. Freezing temperatures could stiffen cloth before it was ready, while illness could increase the need for clean pieces at the very moment labour was stretched thin. The standard remained meaningful even when circumstances made it difficult to reach. Someone still had to perform the work. Women and older girls carried much of domestic nursing in many 19th century homes, though men, boys, neighbours and relatives could fetch water, tend fires, sit watch, obtain help, and take over other chores. The exact division within an Ingalls sickroom cannot be reconstructed from general custom. The broader burden of repeated household care is much better supported. That burden should not be flattened into a picture of helpless sacrifice. Domestic nursing required observation, memory, timing, and judgment. The caregiver noticed whether a person could drink, whether bedding needed changing, whether the room had grown too warm, and whether familiar measures were failing. She also decided when household care had reached its limit and outside help was needed, if outside help could be reached. Medical assistance varied sharply by place and year. A doctor might be near, far away, expensive, delayed by weather or unavailable. Remedies sold in shops and advertised in papers range from useful preparations to products making claims they could not fulfill. The household worked within that uncertain field without the diagnostic tools later medicine would take for granted. It would be easy to assign every remembered fever to bad water or every cough to the house. The evidence does not permit it. Similar symptoms could arise from different causes, and retrospective family stories seldom contain the tests needed to separate them. The evidence can describe exposure and practice without converting possibility into diagnosis. The same restraint applies to emotion. No document can tell us what Carolyn felt each time she folded a clean cloth or listened beside a bed. The action itself is enough. Water was carried, fuel was used, linen was changed, and ordinary household attention narrowed around a person who needed care. As knowledge of infection developed, some nursing advice became more explicit about separating articles, boiling certain cloths or utensils, washing hands, and disinfecting rooms. The change was gradual. Older sanitary habits, newer germ explanations, commercial disinfectants, local custom, and practical necessity overlapped through the later 19th century. No single date turned every American sickroom into a modern one. Even the soundest advice could exceed a family's resources. Separation was difficult in a small home. Abundant hot water required abundant fuel and labour. A dedicated vessel or pile of linen assumed that enough vessels and linen existed. Instructions written for comfortable households reveal useful standards, but they also reveal the distance between an ideal and a constrained home. The basin carried that distance in plain sight. Filled with clean, warm water, it could wash, soothe, and support dignity. It could help remove contamination from skin or cloth. It could not diagnose an illness, purify the source from which it was filled, replace nourishment, or create a sewer beyond the wall. This boundary matters because care is often judged by outcomes it could never fully control. A person might recover after devoted nursing, or worsen despite it. The result alone cannot measure the skill of the caregiver. Household hygiene reduced some risks and discomforts, while remaining only one part of health. There was also the matter of proximity. Care required hands near another body, cloth moving between water and skin, vessels carried through shared space, and bedding lifted at close range. A caregiver could not remain perfectly separate while performing the work. In a one-room or two-room home, even the idea of isolation had strict physical limits, yet those limits did not make the effort empty. A clean face could ease an uncomfortable hour. Dry bedding could permit rest. Fresh air, sensibly managed, could make a room less oppressive. A rinsed cup and a clean spoon could protect the little nourishment a sick person was able to take. The emotional centre of this work rests in repetition rather than drama. The fire is checked, the water is warmed, the cloth is folded, and the basin is carried out. Then, when needed, the sequence begins again. Care appears as a series of ordinary decisions made while no one knows exactly how the night will end. For the listener resting in a room where clean water arrives with the turn of the hand, that repetition can be easy to miss. The Prairie household had to produce each comfort before it could offer it. Even tenderness depended on fuel, cloth, vessels, strength, and a place where the used water could go. The series could show a worried family gathered near a bed because faces carry feeling clearly. The quieter structure around them was harder to keep on screen. Someone had prepared the cup, washed the spoon, aired the covering, emptied the vessel, and made the bed ready for another hour. By the end of that hour, the basin no longer represents cleanliness as appearance. It represents care working within a boundary. It holds what the household can carry to the bedside, and it also marks what the household cannot solve alone. That boundary closes the question opened by the water beyond the back door. Clean hands, clean cloth, careful food, and a freshened room could all matter greatly. They could not turn a compromised source, a crowded dwelling, severe weather, or an uncertain illness into a harmless condition. The labour was skilled, necessary, and finite. The next condition waited in the walls themselves. A basin did not stand in an abstract pioneer house. It stood inside timber, boards, plaster, or earth, each holding damp, dust, warmth, and cold in a different way. The work of keeping a person clean and comfortable changed again when the house was partly made from the ground beneath it. When the basin left the sick room, it returned to a house that could shape every effort at cleanliness. Walls, floor, roof, doorway and window decided where dust settled, where air moved, and how long dampness remained. On the Prairie, housekeeping did not begin with a cloth. It began with the shelter around the cloth. In the spring of 1874, Charles Ingalls brought his family to land near Walnut Grove, Minnesota. Their home there was a dugout cut into the bank of Plum Creek, distinct from regional sod houses used here only as comparison. It was not the neat frame house that later came to represent prairie life on television. It was a temporary dwelling made possible by the earth itself. The surviving record fixes that broad fact with confidence. It does not preserve a daily cleaning journal from the dugout. It does not measure the dampness of its walls, count the insects that entered, or tell how often Caroline swept its floor. Those details have to remain bounded. The house can be understood without pretending that every private hour survived. A dugout answered an immediate problem. Timber, milled boards, glass, nails, and transport all cost money. A bank of firm earth was already present. By cutting into it and closing the exposed side, a settler could create shelter with far less purchased material than a frame house required. Earth also offered protection from wind and moderated sudden changes of temperature. Those advantages mattered. An earth house was not simply a hole where a family endured misery. It could be a practical first stage in settlement. Warm compared with a thin claim shanty during cold weather, and cooler during summer heat. Its low profile met the prairie wind with less exposed wall. It gave a household time to plant, earn, and gather material for something more permanent. Yet the same earth that sheltered a family also entered the work of keeping house. A wooden wall could be wiped. A packed earthen surface had to be managed in a different way. Loose grains could be tracked by shoes, lifted by skirts, or carried on a draft. A roof covered with soil might shed fine material when it dried, and a hard rain could test every layer intended to keep water outside. This is where regional comparison becomes useful, provided it remains clearly labelled. Archaeological work at settler dugouts near Nicodemus, Kansas, shows walls and floors formed from packed earth, with some surfaces finished to hold down dirt and insects. Other Great Plains records describe roofs made with poles, brush and soil. South Dakota records for early sod buildings note good insulation, along with moisture trouble during rain. None of those buildings was the Ingalls Dugout at Plum Creek. Kansas soil, Dakota weather, construction skill, and available materials were not identical to conditions in Minnesota. The comparisons reveal the kinds of problems earth construction could create. They cannot supply missing scenes from one family home. Dust was one problem, but not the only one. Dampness could soften a surface, darken a corner, or keep cloth from drying quickly. A wet patch did not prove neglect. It could mean that weather had crossed a boundary built from local soil and limited materials. The response was more labour. Bedding had to be aired when conditions allowed. Mud had to be removed. A weak place in a roof or wall had to be patched before the next rain enlarged it. Ventilation carried its own balance. An opening brought light and fresh air, but it could also admit dust, insects, and cold. Regional dugouts sometimes included a small window when glass was available. The size and placement of such an opening affected the room greatly. Too little moving air allowed cooking steam, damp clothing, and the breath of several people to linger. Too much opening surrendered precious warmth. Again, no surviving source gives a reliable daily measure for the Plum Creek room. It is safer to say that a small earth-dwelling concentrated ordinary household moisture. Cooking, washing, drying cloth, and sleeping all happened within limited space. Every wet garment placed near a stove added water to the air. Every closed door preserved heat while slowing the escape of that moisture. Pests belong to the risk, not to a guaranteed condition. Cracks in walls, roof material, bedding, stored food, animals nearby, and travellers moving between homes could offer insects many routes. Period household manuals devoted careful attention to bedbugs, fleas, flies, and ants, because these creatures were familiar problems. Their presence in the manual shows concern across many households. It does not prove that the Ingalls dugout held any particular infestation. The distinction matters because hardship is easily exaggerated into filth. A family could sweep, air bedding, comb hair, wash cloth, cover food, and still face dust or insects. Cleanliness reduced some risks. It did not give complete control over a building made from living ground and exposed to weather. The floor carried that contradiction each day. Packed earth could be firm beneath the feet, but it was not sealed from the soil below in the modern sense. Water near the surface, dirt on boots, crumbs from a meal, and ash from the stove all met in the same small interior. Removing one kind of debris could disturb another. Housekeeping became an effort to keep materials in their proper places. Ash belonged near the fire or in a safe container. Food belonged covered and raised when possible. Wet cloth needed air. Bedding needed protection from the floor and walls. Wastewater needed to leave the dwelling rather than settle beside the threshold. None of these acts was dramatic alone. Together they decided whether a cramped room felt orderly or overwhelmed. The basin on the table now carried a wider meaning. Its water could clean a face, a wound, a cup, or a small piece of cloth, but when that water had been used, it also had to be carried out without making the floor wetter or drawing more soil inside. The work did not end when the cloth looked clean. It ended when water, dirt, ash, food, and waste had each been moved to a safer place. Privacy was also shaped by the house. A single room gave few places for changing clothes, washing the body, tending menstrual cloth, or caring for sickness. Modesty depended on timing, blankets, turned backs, and the cooperation of the family. The record rarely preserves these arrangements because they were ordinary and private. Their absence should not be filled with invented embarrassment or invented ease. Children lived close to every domestic process. They saw water carried, fires tended, cloth wrung, crumbs swept, and bedding lifted. In a small shelter, there was little distance between a task and the person who benefited from it. A clean collar or dry blanket could not appear separate from the hands that had worked on it. That closeness could make order feel especially precious. A folded cloth, A swept patch of floor, or a basin placed where it would not be kicked over, created a small line against confusion. The room did not need to resemble a modern house for its occupants to value neatness. Respectability could be maintained through care even when the surfaces themselves remained rough. The dugout also corrects a familiar visual shortcut. Prairie cleanliness involved more than whether a person had bathed recently at all. The house entered the answer. Its materials affected dust, drying, privacy, pests, storage, and the movement of waste. Hygiene was partly architecture, even when the architecture was temporary. The Ingalls family did not remain in the dugout forever. That fact belongs to a broader pattern in which earth shelters often served as an early stage before a frame building became possible. The move did not separate a dirty past from a clean future. A frame house changed the work. It offered different surfaces, different cracks, and different demands. Earth houses also varied too widely to become a single symbol. A settler dugout was not the same as the carefully developed earth lodges built by native nations of the plains. A sod school was not a creek bank home. A prosperous ranch spring room was not a poor family dwelling. Material alone cannot erase purpose, design, knowledge, or culture. What can be said is quieter and more useful. At Plum Creek, the family lived for a time inside a bank of earth. That shelter reduced one kind of exposure while creating a daily negotiation with soil, air, water, and weather. The labour of cleanliness extended into the building itself. By evening, the floor might be orderly, and the cloths hung where the warmest air could reach them. The basin might stand empty, ready for water to be carried again. Outside, the creek and bank would remain close, useful and indifferent. The house had given shelter, but it could not cancel the season. That limit became clearest when cold settled over the prairie. Dampness stiffened, bare ground hardened, and water that had moved freely began to hold still. The next burden was not dirt entering the house. It was the simple problem of keeping enough water liquid to use. Liquid water became a household achievement. In mild weather, a pail could be lifted from a well, spring, creek, or pump and carried home. In deep cold, the source, the path, the container, and the doorway all changed. Water still existed everywhere, but much of it had become difficult to move. The winter of 1880 and 1881 gives this difficulty a firm historical setting. It was not merely a dramatic season remembered by a novelist. Weather research identifies it as one of the most severe winters documented during the early settlement of the Central Plains. A powerful storm arrived in October, and repeated blizzards followed. The experience around De Smet is supported by more than the later Little House story. A surviving letter from Eliza Jane Wilder described an October blizzard that hid objects only a short distance away and blocked the railroad. She wrote that after the middle of December she believed no train reached De Smet until May. Federal records also confirm the exceptional cold and the long disruption. The record does not provide an Ingalls household ledger for every pail of water. It cannot establish exactly how often faces were washed, how many garments were cleaned, or which task was postponed on a particular morning. The safest conclusion comes from the conditions. Severe cold narrowed the choices available to every household that depended on carried water and solid fuel. A well or pump could become harder to operate when ice formed around its working parts. A creek could disappear beneath a hard surface. Snow could be gathered, but a full vessel of loose snow yielded much less liquid after melting. Ice could be chopped and carried, but it added weight before it ever reached the stove. Every method moved the burden indoors. Frozen material had to become liquid, and cold water had to be warmed when a task required warmth. The stove was already responsible for heating the room and preparing food. A pot reserved for water occupied space and absorbed fuel that the family needed for other purposes. Fuel therefore entered the hygiene decision before any washing began. A large bath was not merely a question of modesty or custom. It required enough water, enough heat, enough time, and a room warm enough for wet skin to be safe and tolerable. During a severe shortage, those requirements could place full immersion far below food, drinking water, and urgent care. This does not support the claim that the family stopped washing for the winter. Partial washing remained possible. A cloth could clean the face, hands, neck, or another part of the body with far less water than a filled tub. The basin allowed a household to divide cleanliness into smaller acts and match each act to the resources available that day. Hands connected the house to nearly every risk. They handled fuel, food, animals, chamber vessels, sickroom cloth, and the ordinary soil carried through the door. Even without a modern account of microbes, families had practical reasons to remove visible grime and unpleasant residue. When water was scarce, hands and food vessels likely took priority over a luxurious full bath. The word likely matters. No record establishes a written Ingalls ranking of water use. The priority is a reasonable inference from the demands of survival and from period household advice that treated cooking, dish care, sickness, and personal washing as separate needs. It should not be turned into a quotation or a rigid rule. Cold also changed the fate of cloth after it was washed. Water held in fabric had to go somewhere. Outdoors, a wet garment could stiffen quickly. Indoors, it might dry near the stove, but that placed more moisture into a small occupied room. Drying slowly could leave cloth cold and unpleasant, while placing it too close to heat risked scorching. Space around the stove was therefore valuable. Mittens, stockings, towels, diapers, menstrual cloth, and bedding did not all have equal urgency at the same moment. Something needed for the next trip outside could claim the warmest place. A cloth needed for illness or infant care could not wait simply because another item was easier to dry. Winter cleanliness became an exercise in sequence. One item was warmed while another was used. One pail thawed while a meal cooked. A small cloth dried while a larger piece remained folded or frozen. The household could not command the season to hurry. It could only keep necessary materials moving through limited warmth. A period household manual advised keeping filled water pails in a kitchen place where they would not freeze. That small instruction reveals the constant attention cold required. Water already carried indoors could be lost as a useful liquid if left near a draught or an outer wall. Preventing the problem saved the labour of thawing it again. Containers also needed care. Ice expanded and repeated freezing could strain a vessel. A wooden pail could leak if its staves changed condition. Metal became painfully cold to bare hands. A dropped crock or basin could remove a useful tool from a household that could not quickly replace it. The body paid for these small difficulties. Fingers grew stiff while carrying a handle. Wet cuffs held cold near the wrists. Steam warmed the face briefly, then settled on cooler surfaces. None of this required a spectacular accident to become exhausting. It was the repetition that made winter hygiene severe. The long winter also restricted the town beyond each doorway. When trains stopped, flour, coal, and other supplies could not be replenished in the usual way. The surviving family letter supports reports that merchants ran out of flour and coal. Scarcity turned every remaining pound of fuel and every stored household article into something to be guarded. Soap could be stretched. A worn cloth could be mended. Water could be used for a smaller area instead of a larger one. A task could be moved to the warmest part of the day. These were not signs that cleanliness had lost its value. They were ways of preserving it under constraint. A clean home in such a winter could not mean that every surface and garment remained freshly washed. It meant that the most consequential needs were met first. Drinking water stayed protected. Food vessels were kept usable. Waste was moved away from living space. A sick person received what care the household could provide. Wet things were dried before they became another source of cold. The basin became almost a measure of the day. When it held warm water, it represented fuel already spent and labour already completed. Its contents might be used carefully, one cloth at a time. The water was not insignificant because the amount was small. Its smallness was the reason it had to matter. A viewer accustomed to a tap may imagine scarcity as an empty bucket. Winter scarcity was more complicated. The bucket might be full of ice, the snowbank might be deep, the creek might lie beneath the feet. Water was present, yet trapped behind work, heat, time, and risk. That difference helps explain why a household could appear orderly while postponing a large washing task. Cleanliness was not abandoned, it was compressed. The clean cloth near the stove, the covered pail, and the rinsed cup carried more practical value than an impressive tub that consumed the day's warmth. Privacy tightened with the cold as well. Doors and windows remained closed more often. Family members gathered near the same heat. A partial wash had to be arranged within that shared space. The difficulty was not only getting warm water, but finding a warm and modest moment in which to use it. The surviving sources do not describe those moments for each Ingalls daughter. They provide the conditions and then fall silent. That silence should remain honest. It can reveal the limits of the record without erasing the work that the conditions plainly required. As storms continued, there was little reason to expect each day to restore what the previous day had taken. Paths drifted over, fuel diminished. A thaw could be followed by another freeze. The household system had to work without confidence that a train, a merchant, or warmer weather would solve the problem tomorrow. That uncertainty changed the emotional weight of ordinary objects. A dry towel was not merely tidy, it was ready. A sound pail was not merely common, it could carry the next necessity. A piece of soap did not promise transformation. It extended the usefulness of water already hard won. The last winter lesson was therefore about readiness rather than perfection. Families protected the next usable cloth, the next accessible pail, the next small reserve of fuel. Such choices did not make cold harmless, and the surviving record does not reveal every choice. They kept a limited household system from failing all at once. Drying indoors also asked the household to manage moisture. Cloth placed too near heat could scorch, while cloth left in cooler air remained damp. Space around the stove was limited, and every hanging item entered the same contest for warmth shared by cooking, rest, and necessary work throughout the day. Cold also changed the containers themselves. A pail left where water froze could split, loosen, or become locked under ice, while metal chilled the hands that carried it. Protecting the vessel was part of protecting the supply. The household needed not only water, but a reliably sound container ready when the next trip or thaw made water available for safe immediate use indoors again. The winter eventually ended. Rail service returned, and the routes between small towns and larger markets reopened. The return of movement did more than refill flour barrels and coal bins. It restored access to manufactured articles, printed advice, and choices that a household could not produce from local materials alone. Yet the season had already shown the limit of every new convenience. A product on a distant shelf was useful only if transport, money, weather, and household priority allowed it to reach the hand that needed it. When the town began to fill again, progress arrived in packages, but never all at once. When the trains moved again, the town shelf became part of the household system. It could offer what the ash hopper, sewing basket, garden, and woodpile could not. Manufactured soap, tooth powder, brushes, paper goods, cloth, pins, and cleaning aids widened the choices available to a family. They did not remove the work of choosing. Store-bought goods were not new at the end of the 19th century. General merchants had long carried useful personal and household articles. Merchants sold soap before Laura and her sisters were born. Toothbrushes and dentifrices also had a much longer history than the familiar picture of a bare frontier shelf suggests. What changed was scale, distribution, and regularity. Rail lines connected small towns to larger commercial centres. Factories produced named goods in greater quantity. Printed advertisements told customers that a particular cake, powder, brush, or paper was modern, refined, economical, or healthful. The object arrived with a story about what cleanliness ought to look like. Soap shows the transition clearly. Families could still make it from fat and lye when materials, time, and skill allowed. At the same time, an influential household guide published in 1869 observed that comparatively few New England families still made their own soap. Many bought it from a soap maker instead. That comment did not describe every Western settlement. It did show that home production and commercial purchase already overlapped. A prairie family might make one kind, buy another, or change methods after moving nearer a town. The choice could vary with cash, animal fat, wood ash, season, and the goods a merchant happened to stock. Manufactured soap did not have one purpose. A strong laundry soap and a milder soap intended for the body were different products, even when advertisements blurred the line. Perfume, wrapping, brand names, and claims of purity could raise the price without reducing the labour of carrying water or washing cloth. The shelf also changed dental care. By the middle of the century, commercial tooth powders and liquids were being promoted in the United States. Brushes with bone or ivory handles and animal bristles existed, and mass production expanded later in the century. A period manual could recommend a brush and powdered chalk after meals. Existence was not habit. Period objects and advertisements show available brushes and powders, but they do not establish regular use in every home. Cloths, fingers, homemade powders, and prepared dentifrices all appear in broader historical evidence across different places and households. Ingredients and routines varied, while some commercial mixtures could be abrasive or acidic. The safe conclusion is neither that pioneers had no dental care, nor that a town shelf created modern oral health. It offered options. Money, access, instruction, comfort, and routine decided whether those options became daily practice. No surviving purchase record used here identifies a particular Ingalls tooth powder tin. Paper followed a similar path. Rolled and perforated toilet paper was patented in the late 1870s and took on a more familiar form by the 1890s. Its arrival did not instantly empty every privy of newspaper, scrap paper, catalogue pages, or other available material. A new article entered a mixed household economy. Mail order widened that economy beyond the local merchant. Montgomery Ward began a successful catalogue business in 1872, aiming city goods toward rural customers. Orders could travel by mail, while packages often moved through private carriers or to a railway station for collection. The catalogue did not make distance disappear. A family still needed cash or credit, postage, transport, and confidence in a product it could not inspect. Weight limits restricted what the postal system would carry. Before rural home delivery, collecting mail or a parcel could require a trip into town. The printed page nevertheless changed expectation. It placed many possible objects beside one another, even when most remained unaffordable. A household could compare a familiar handmade tool with a manufactured alternative. A child could grow up knowing that another kind of brush, soap, basin, or cloth existed somewhere beyond the local shelf. Advice travelled with the goods. Domestic manuals, newspapers, almanacs, advertisements, and package labels connected cleanliness with comfort, health, appearance, morality, and social respect. Some advice was useful. Some was exaggerated. Some products were sold through fear of odour, embarrassment, or rejection. That commercial pressure should not be mistaken for scientific progress. A neatly wrapped product could be harsh, ineffective, or dangerous. Consumers had little protection from extravagant claims. Tooth powders could damage enamel. Hair preparations could contain hazardous ingredients. A label that used the language of health did not prove that the contents were safe. Scientific understanding was changing at the same time, but along a different route. During the 1870s and 1880s, researchers produced compelling evidence that microscopic organisms cause particular infectious diseases. In 1887, the Federal Marine Hospital Service established a small laboratory to apply the new bacteriology to epidemic disease. These developments transformed medical thought, but knowledge did not move instantly from a laboratory into every kitchen. Older explanations based on bad air and foul smells remained influential. Some sanitary reforms had already improved drainage, waste removal and water supply before microbes were widely accepted as the cause. That overlap produced a useful result. A person did not need to understand a bacterium to notice that clean water, removed waste, aired bedding, and washed vessels could improve daily conditions. Germ theory later gave more precise explanations for some of those benefits. It did not invent every effective practice. Municipalities expanded water and sewage systems during the 1880s as public health reform and germ theory gained authority. Flush toilets became more common in towns and cities. Rural homes did not receive these systems at the same pace, and many continued to rely on wells, carried water, chamber pots and privies far into the next century. The same decade could therefore contain very different worlds. One household might turn a tap above a fixed basin, another might collect water from a pump and carry it across frozen ground. A store could advertise toilet soap to customers whose homes had no private room for bathing. Progress arrived unevenly not only between city and prairie, but between neighbouring families. Income, location, age, health, household size, and personal preference all mattered. One family could adopt a purchased soap while keeping a homemade laundry mixture. Another could own a toothbrush and still use it irregularly. Movement through several homes made this change especially visible in the Ingalls era. A household near a remote claim did not face the same choices as one in a railroad town. The family did not live inside a single unchanging frontier moment. Routes opened, towns grew, stores stocked new goods, and advice altered across the years. The long answer is now clear. Prairie hygiene cannot be reduced to one shocking custom. It was a system that changed with place and time. The basin, the cloth, the privy, the well, the stove, and the shelf all belonged to the answer, but their relationship never stayed fixed. The surviving record also sets a firm boundary. Material collections prove that products existed. Catalogues prove that goods were offered. Manuals prove that advice circulated. Public records prove that towns, weather, transport, and sanitation changed. None of those sources alone proves what Caroline Ingalls purchased, or how each daughter managed every private routine. That uncertainty protects the history from folklore. The brutal truths are not claims that the family lived in constant filth, shared one foul tub by rule, lacked toothbrushes, or ignored cleanliness. The strongest evidence rejects those easy pictures. The severity lay in the price of an ordinary clean result. Water had weight, heat consumed fuel, cloth held labour. Waste had to cross the same ground from which drinking water came. Privacy had to be made inside crowded rooms. Cold could turn every liquid task into a sequence of thawing, warming, using, and drying. Television could show a tidy braid, a bright collar, a basin, or a wooden privy, and then move to the next event. What it could not easily hold in a single scene was the accumulated system behind those objects. A clean appearance was the visible end of work that began beyond the frame and continued after the story moved on. The final change was therefore not a sudden victory of modern cleanliness over a dirty past. It was a widening field of choices. Manufactured goods, printed knowledge, bacteriology, and public sanitation gradually altered what households could do and what they believed cleanliness could prevent. Older methods remained beside the new ones. A purchased cake of soap met water carried by hand. Printed dental advice met a brush whose purchase and use depended on access and household means. A public health warning reached a home whose well and privy could not simply be moved. By the close of the Ingalls century, the town shelf had grown fuller, but the household still had to translate every object into practice. Someone opened the package, protected it from damp, measured its use, heated the water, washed the cloth, and carried away what remained. That is the bounded answer the record can support. Prairie families were not people without standards of cleanliness. They were people maintaining those standards through a demanding material system. then adapting as new goods and explanations reached them unevenly. New goods altered possibilities, but each one still entered an older household calendar of meals, fuel, sewing, school, work, and weather. The fullest shelf could not choose a priority or perform a task. It offered another tool, and human judgment determined whether that tool became useful there. Night has settled over the Prairie house. The last work of the day has grown quiet and the room has returned to simple shapes. A basin rests where it can be found in the morning. Its surface no longer trembles beneath a moving hand. Nearby, a clean cloth hangs in the remaining warmth. It is not perfectly white, and it does not need to be. It has been rinsed, wrung, opened to the air, and left ready for whatever small task comes next. Beyond the walls, the ground slopes into darkness. The well holds one kind of necessity below the soil. Farther away, the privy holds what the household has carefully carried out. The distance between them is invisible from the bed, but it has mattered all day. Nothing in the room looks brutal now. That was always part of what went unseen. The weight disappeared after the pail was set down. The heat disappeared after the water warmed. The labour disappeared into the clean face, the rinsed cup, the dry cloth, and the orderly floor. The television Prairie could preserve that final image. Hair lay smooth, clothing looked fresh. A table waited beneath gentle light. What remained outside the picture was the long chain of decisions that allowed the image to exist. Water had to be reached before it could be used. Fuel had to be spent before cold water became warm. Cloth had to be washed, dried, guarded and mended. Waste had to be moved away, even when cold or darkness made the path unpleasant. The basin gathered those truths without making a sound. It served the body, the kitchen, and the sick room. It also revealed the limit shared by them all. Only so much water could be carried, heated, and kept clean at one time. The cloth carried a quieter history. It touched the work that public stories often left unnamed. It absorbed water, soil, food, sweat, and the evidence of private bodies. Then hands returned it to use. Outside, the well and the privy marked the most serious boundary. One supplied life, the other received waste. A household could keep them separate with care, yet the people who first chose their places did not possess every explanation that later science would provide. By morning, the basin would fill again. The clean cloth would be lifted from its place. Feet would cross the ground between the house and its sources of water, fuel, and disposal. Cleanliness would begin again as a practice, not remain as a permanent condition. That repetition deserves a gentler understanding than the old jokes about dirty pioneers. The families of the Prairie were not waiting for modern people to teach them that comfort, order, and dignity mattered. They worked toward those things with the materials and knowledge within reach. They also lived with limits that care alone could not overcome. A careful mother could not make a well immune to everything hidden in soil. A diligent daughter could not make wet cloth dry quickly in every season. A tidy room could not turn a dugout into a plumbed house. Their effort was therefore neither failure nor quaint perfection. It was ordinary human care under difficult conditions. It was the decision to wash what could be washed, protect what could be protected, and begin again when the work returned. That is where the 15 truths finally come to rest, not in disgust, and not in a claim that every household followed one grim custom. They rest in the distance between a clean appearance and the labour required to create it. The people at the centre of this history rarely received applause for that distance. Much of the work belonged to women and girls, and much of it vanished as soon as it succeeded. A clean cloth did not announce the hands that had worked in water. A filled basin did not name the person who had carried its weight. Yet care remained visible in another way. It appeared in readiness. Water waited where it was needed. Cloth was folded or hung for use. The room held enough order for a family to eat, sleep, recover, and meet the next day. There is tenderness in that readiness. It does not require turning hardship into beauty. It only asks that the labour be seen without mockery, and that the people who performed it be allowed their full intelligence, endurance, privacy, and dignity. The people who carried this work can be remembered with dignity, their labour recognised without inventing the private details that surviving records did not preserve. For the listener resting now, the basin can remain on the distant table. The pail does not need to be lifted. The cloth does not need to be wrung. The path across the cold ground belongs to another time and can grow still. Thank you for spending these quiet hours with the people whose work so often disappeared behind a tidy room. Their day has been carried as far as it needs to go. The record has given what it can, and its silences have been left undisturbed. The prairie has darkened beyond the window, and the room has softened into rest. The ground keeps its careful distances. The basin waits for morning. For now, there is only the bed beneath you, the air moving easily, and the permission to let every remaining thought grow lighter. The work is finished. The story is complete. Sleep peacefully. Good night.